Hello again, fellow BeachBum traders. In this video, we're going to talk about how to make money using the technology adoption life cycle or the product adoption life cycle. This topic is very closely related to our other video on how to make money using the hype cycle, how to make money using the Gartner Hype Cycle. So these are very related, and I will put the description or the URL for how to make money using the hype cycle in the description box below. So now let's get started and let's talk about how we can make money trading using the technology adoption life cycle. So what is the technology adoption life cycle? Here is the definition of the technology adoption life cycle from Wikipedia, and I will include the link to this Wikipedia article in the description box below. And we can see that the technology adoption life cycle is a sociological model. It's a model that describes the adoption or acceptance of a product or innovation. So we're also going to refer to this as the product adoption life cycle. And it's based on demographics and psychology. And again, we're talking about trading in the markets, and the market is also based on demographics and psychology. We can see it's an adoption over time. It's modeled by a normal distribution or a bell curve from statistics. We can see, and we'll go over in detail each of these phases, but here's the typical bell curve. We can see the different groups that adopt over time, and again we'll go over this in more detail in a second, but we've got, at the left tail we've got innovators adopting first, early adopters, an early majority, a late majority, and a laggard. And again, the first group to adopt a technology or product are called innovators, followed by early adopters, and then early majority, late majority. And again, you can read this article in more detail. And then let's talk about the various categories, the various phases of adoption for a given technology or product, and then how does that relate to trading. How can we make money from this in our trading careers? So let's talk about each of these groups and what does that mean. Okay, let's talk in a little more detail about each of the groups or each of the categories in the technology adoption life cycle that we saw in this bell curve. So again, from the Wikipedia article that we mentioned, here's how they define these categories, and here's an example where innovators, are more educated, more prosperous, more risk-oriented. Early adopters are younger, more educated, community leaders. Early majority tend to be more conservative but still open to new ideas. Late majority tend to be older, less educated, conservative, less social, and then laggards are very conservative, and again they talk about laggards as phobics. These are people that resist a change, resist a new technology. They are the last people to adopt it, and essentially at that point it's become ubiquitous, and they essentially don't really have a choice. You pretty much have to use a smartphone nowadays, or you're considered, outcast. So again, we'll talk about what do each of those categories mean in terms of a product adoption, a technology adoption. You also see a good reference in this article to what's called crossing the chasm, and we're going to talk about the chasm and what does that mean, the S-curves and reinforcement of S-curves. This is something you'll hear Kathy Wood of ARK Invest talk about S-curves, and this is part of this technology adoption life cycle, part of the product adoption life cycle. What does that mean? The chasm is a gap or a chasm between the first two adopter groups. innovators and early adopters. So in this graphic, this is not being shown, but we'll show a graphic in a second on where that chasm is and what does this mean to have that chasm between the first two groups. So in this graphic on our thumbnail on the page for our video, you can clearly see what we're talking about in terms of the chasm and the crossing of the chasm. As we can see between the early phases of adoption, innovators and early adoptions, there's this chasm. And what this means is that a technology or product, it gets adopted very early on by innovators, early adopters, people that get excited about the technology, want to be first to use it, etc. Technophiles, etc., tend to adopt, whatever new technology comes out, and then it essentially hits a wall, hits a chasm. And between the early adopters and reaching the majority, there's some period of time to cross and momentum that's required to cross this chasm to get it beyond your technophiles to where it starts to really enter society, get adopted by a larger majority of the population. In this book, you can see more detail about the details of crossing the chasm and what does this mean. Essentially, it's a discontinuity. There's a gap, a time between these two initial adoptions and getting penetration into the overall society. And it's hard to tell, how long it's going to take, what kind of momentum, impetus it's going to take to cross that chasm and to get into the body of the bell curve where you're starting to get to a majority of people adopting a given product or technology. So again, we're talking about how do we make money, how do we use this for trading. We'll talk about what does that chasm mean, how do we know when we're hitting that chasm, how do we know when we're crossing the chasm, and how do we trade in those two phases, before the chasm and after the chasm. Okay, since we've seen that there's this chasm in the product technology adoption life cycle, how do we evaluate whether a company is going to be able to cross that chasm? What does that mean to cross that chasm? Well, here's a Wikipedia article related to the book by Jeffrey Moore about crossing the chasm, and I will put the link to this Wikipedia article in the description box below. And you can see here it talks about, what does it mean to cross the chasm? What is that chasm? And we can see it's a break between the innovators and early adopters and the early majority, late majority. And we could see this is the most difficult step, is making that transition between the visionaries, the early adopters, and what he's calling the pragmatists, the early majority, which is again breaching this chasm between early adopters and early majority. So it's key that when we're evaluating a company, a product, a stock, that's in these early phases, the early adoption phase or the innovator phase, are they going to be able to cross that chasm, or are they going to fail at that point? So that's why I wanted to bring that to your attention, is again, when you're looking at a company or stock, product, and it's in that early adoption phase, is it going to be able to cross that chasm and get further adoption? Or is it going to stagnate there? Is it going to be surpassed by a second, third generation product, etc.? A number of technologies companies, etc., they start out well, get early adoption. Again, your technophiles like it, etc. Betamax versus VHS, OS2 versus Windows. A lot of things start out looking good. They hit this chasm, and then they never go any further. They never reach any real adoption. So when you're evaluating your stock, particularly for a long-term investment, and we'll talk about how to trade these in shorter time frames as well. But if you're looking for a long-term investment, you realize you're in these early phases of the technology adoption life cycle, you need to ask this question: are they going to be able to cross the chasm? So hopefully this information will help you evaluate that. We'll now talk about S-curves and the technology acceptance model and what all that means, and how you can also use that information to help you evaluate these stocks, and also how to trade them in the different phases of this technology adoption life cycle. So you also see in the definition of this technology adoption life cycle, it suggests that for discontinuous innovations, technological innovations, they're often described by an S-curve, and you'll hear others talk about S-curve. Kathy Woods, etc. will talk about how these innovative technologies tend to follow an S-curve. So what does that mean, and how does that apply to what we want to evaluate with investing or trading stocks? Well, here's the article that's referenced there, and I will put a direct link into the description box below to this. It's an MIT presentation that describes all of this dynamics of technology change. What is an S-curve? We can see an S-curve has the characteristics where it's an accelerating trajectory up to a point, and then that trajectory, the slope of that line, decelerates up to some plateau. There's an asymptotal limit wherein it plateaus and stops increasing anymore. We can see, initially increasing and then declining R&D productivity due to some physical limit. And that physical limit will vary from technology to technology. It also, in my opinion, applies to a market. So at some point, we're talking about adoption. At some point, technology or a product has fully penetrated its market. All the people that are going to adopt it have, and then it's going to stagnate, which means obviously sales, etc., earnings are going to stagnate once it plateaus. Again, I'll leave a link to this article. You can read all the details of it. But again, we can see the performance, the technologies, etc., products tend to follow this type of S-curve where you have and they sometimes call this a knee, where the bend actually occurs and it goes into an increasing trajectory, hits some point of inflection, and now the technology or the trajectory is decreasing. And that's the important thing to see in the S-curve, is which part of the S-curve are you in? Are you in this accelerating portion of the trajectory or the decelerating portion of the trajectory, or have you hit this limit and it's plateaued? Obviously, if we look at that in terms of a stock price, here we're having an increasing acceleration of stock price. Here we're hitting an inflection point, and now it's still, the stock price is still increasing, but it's increasing at a decelerating rate. And eventually you're going to hit a plateau, and it's either going to stagnate there or it's going to turn down, maybe overcome by a different technology that's coming up its S-curve while this one is declining. So again, I'll leave a reference to this. You can get a lot more information about S-curves and the motivation behind them, etc. But I hope this helps, and we'll continue. So how do we evaluate, or what additional information can we use to evaluate whether a company, a product, a technology is going to be able to cross that chasm between the early adopters, technophiles, etc., and the early majority? Well, another input, another useful information, and I'll put a link to this Wikipedia article in the description box below, also is it's what's called the technology acceptance model. And the reason I wanted to point that out is just a couple additional variables that will hopefully help you evaluate when you're doing due diligence on an investment, on a company, a product, a technology. How do you evaluate whether it's going to be able to cross that chasm? And I think these variables are helpful. Some questions you can ask is, what's the perceived usefulness of the product? Is this is it perceived to be useful? Is it easy to use? Again, when we're talking about early adopters, the first generation products, sometimes, again, since the first generation, it may not be the most easy to use, it may not be the most functional version, and therefore it may not be able to cross that chasm, may be overcome by a product that comes out that's easier to use. So again, I think those are useful variables to look at. Again, you can look at this article in more detail, but some other variables they point out in this model is the perception of how important others view this technology. Is it not a mandatory technology? Does it enhance someone's image? Is having a Tesla, is that a status symbol that may again cause an enhanced adoption? Is it relevant to your job? Do people need this new technology? Do they need the AR glasses now to do their job? Well, obviously that's going to propel the adoption. Does it allow them to increase their output? Does it produce tangible results? So again, these are all factors that when you're looking at a technology and whether it's going to be able to cross the chasm, achieve adoption, I think this is useful information. I hope you do as well. Please let us know in the comments if you find all of this information useful to you. I hope that you do. And again, I'll leave a link to this article in the description box below. So given all this information, how does the technology adoption life cycle relate to a stock's price? How do we use all this information for our stock trading to make money with the technology adoption life cycle? Well, we looked at this curve and the S curve a number of times, and we can see that when an innovation initially comes out, the stock price would increase as it gets a level of adoption through the early adopters phase, and then it would essentially hit the chasm. It would stop, right? So once you identify that your company, your technology, your stock is in this innovation early adoption phase, you can expect increasing momentum, increasing stock price up to the point where it has saturated the early adopters and hits the chasm, at which one would expect the stock price to stop, and it would probably bleed out over time while it's trying to jump this chasm. Once it jumps the chasm and starts getting early majority adoption, again we would see the stock price start to increase again. So again, we would expect the stock price to increase, stagnate, probably bleed out for some period of time, and then start to pick back up, again grow to a peak in the early adoption phase, and then again, this is an adoption curve, so you're still getting adoption in the late majority, so you would expect the stock price to continue to go up, but to go up at a slower rate. Again, adoption is sales, right? When you get more adopters, you get more revenue, you get more sales, and again, through late majority, you're getting more sales, but the rate of increase, so the acceleration in the stock price would decrease. Then eventually, as we looked at the S curve, one would expect that to plateau. You get in the laggard phase, your stock price is going to plateau, stagnate, and then either the company comes out with a new technology and you start up another S curve, or the company stagnates and their stock price is probably going to bleed out as it ages, as the product ages and people go on to a new technology. So how do you know in which category of the technology adoption life cycle a given technology company or stock that you're analyzing is currently? Well, the question to ask yourself is who's adopting the technology, who's buying the product right now. If it's only technophiles, early adopters, and it's not just buying, but who's talking about it? Is it only technophiles, people that are very knowledgeable about new technologies, they jump on the latest and greatest thing all the time? Or is it more people that are more conservative, but they're open to new ideas. So after the early adopters have saturated, is this the next group to try? And you can see sometimes these early majority are influencers. So, the first person in the neighborhood who tends to jump on once the early adoption curve has bought. Or is it the late majority, which means all the early adopters, the influencers, etc. have bought, and now your late majority start to more conservative people, less socially active people start to adopt. Because again, they see their neighbors have already adopted it, and now they want to, they're willing to go along. It's proven. It's a proven technology. Or is it your laggards? It's everybody else has a smartphone already. These people are the last people on the block to have an electric car or whatever. Then you're in the laggard phase. It's just trickling in. The last few people fill in, and then it's pretty much saturated. Now everybody has a smartphone. So again, it helps to identify who's buying, who's adopting, and that will tell you in which phase you are. And then that will help us figure out how to trade, where are we in the curve, how are we going to profit from knowing in what phase, what category of the technology adoption life cycle we're in. Hopefully that all makes sense. Please leave a comment in the comment section below if you have any questions, if you'd like further information, or you can join us in the Facebook group and we can discuss all this further. So again, once we've identified in which category the technology or company or stock that we're analyzing is in, then how do we trade this? How do we profit from knowing in what category our stock is currently in? Well, again, as we've discussed earlier, if we've identified that it's in the early adoption phase and the innovation phase, we would expect an initial momentum, stock increase up to the point where we hit the chasm. So you can ride that momentum as long as it lasts. And again, you can see the reference to the hype cycle. We should hear more news, more hype as the early adopters get excited about it, and increase momentum, increase stock price up to the point where it hits the top of this saturating the early adopters. So, all the technophiles, all the early adopters have already bought their Tesla, and now we're hitting a chasm. Now we have to somehow cross over to that early majority, and that's at the point we would want to sell, right? Once we hit the peak of that early adoption, all the technophiles have now bought, the price is high, we need to wait for it to cross the chasm. I would recommend that's the point at which to sell, and then wait until we see adoption in the early majority. So again, the stock price is probably going to bleed out over time. This company may not even make it, and we may have to wait for another company, a second generation product, etc., for that technology to take hold. Once that takes hold, again, if it's the same stock, we should see another increase, another acceleration in stock price as the early majority starts to adopt. And again, we see along the S-curve, the rate continues up to that point where we hit that inflection point, and that's where we're peaking in the early majority, headed in the late majority. Now, the stock price is going to continue to go up, but it's going to decelerate. So the momentum is starting to decrease. Stock price is still going up. We're still making money as we're getting more adoption through the late majority until we hit that plateau. Once we're in the laggard phase, we're starting to plateau. And again, if we've ridden this curve up, we bought again as it took hold in the early majority, it accelerated, hit inflection, it decelerated, we're still making money, the stock price is still going up. Once we start to plateau, that's a good sign at which to take your profits and sell, most likely. So I hope that all makes sense. If you have any questions, again, put a comment in the comments below in our BeachBum Trading Facebook group. We can discuss it further. But hopefully that tells you how this technology adoption life cycle helps you be able to trade, know when to buy, when to sell, how to ride the momentum up as adoption increases. Okay, let's just very briefly talk about some technologies that we think fall into these various categories as of the end of 2021. Again, this is constantly going to change as things evolve, as things get adopted, as new technologies come out, but just throw out my opinion as to where I think some of these technologies might fall. And then again, we can discuss, debate, etc. in the comments in our BeachBum Trading Facebook group. But again, here's my opinion as to where I think some of these fall right now. Some that I would categorize right now in the innovators phase would be your AR, VR, augmented reality, virtual reality, metaverse. Again, I know there's a lot of discussion, a lot of hype right now about metaverse, but in my humble opinion, I think we're still in the innovator early adopter phase. I think this is technophiles purchasing. I don't think we've hit that point of an early majority. I don't think most people are quite ready for that, and I think we're some time out. Love to see it take hold, but again, I think we're still in a technophile phase for that. Quantum computing, again, great technology, huge promise, but I think we're still in the early phases. There is some commercial products for it, but the vast majority, is not adopted. That it's not ready for prime time yet. Autonomous vehicles, same way. We know it's starting to penetrate some markets, but it's still in an R&D phase. You don't have your neighbor doesn't have an autonomous vehicle. Some things I think are in the early adoption phase. Cryptocurrencies, blockchain. I think, we've got technophiles, early adopters. I do think that these things still need to cross their chasm. I think to get to that majority where, a sizable percentage of people are using blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies. We have a little ways to go, although I think we're approaching. We may be able to cross that chasm in the near future. EVs, same way. We have technophiles. It's approaching the point where an early majority may start to buy EVs. I think we're, again, very close to crossing the chasm and getting wide-scale adoption. Similarly with CRISPR, there are some uses. It's starting to go into different areas. It's not just healthcare, biotech. It's also agriculture, things like that. There's a company called Yield 10 Bioscience that's using CRISPR to do agriculture. So again, I think we're in that early adoption, but I don't think it's hitting mainstream yet. Early majority, some technologies. I think AI is an early majority category. I think we've crossed the chasm. It's starting to get more wide-scale adoption. A lot of the AI, you don't realize that how ubiquitous it already is. The facial recognition on your Apple phone is using AI. The chatbot you're talking to on the website is using natural language processing AI. Again, it's more quiet, but it's starting to become more ubiquitous, and eventually I think this will penetrate almost everything. We'll have some component of AI in it. Your camera that draws a box around a person, identifies tags of the person in Facebook. Those are all using AI. 3D printing has gone through a number of hype cycles in the past, and now I think it's just quietly becoming adopting. More manufacturers are using 3D printing. And again, it's just quieter. It's more manufacturing, medical technologies to do customized orthopedics, etc., is using 3D printing. So I think we're in an early majority there. Eventually, these things will just be ubiquitous. Late majority technologies, I think virtual meetings now, virtual calls, the use of Zoom. I think almost everybody's been on a Zoom meeting at this point going through the pandemic. So I think most people have used Zoom, virtual meetings, virtual calls, video calls, etc. Same with virtual learning, when kids had to go to school via virtual school. Again, I think that's most people now have been exposed to it. They're comfortable with it. I think that will just continue and grow. Technologies that might be in the laggard phase. Online payments, again, almost everybody's, paid for something via Amazon, online, PayPal, Square, Stripe, etc. But it's only the very laggard people, the very phobics that still resist paying for something online. Similarly with investing and stock trading, we had a explosion of retail traders. Most people now understand investing. They know you can get Webull or Robinhood or another platform on your mobile phone, and you can trade stocks, you can invest, which is great. Again, it's just your phobics or people that are uninformed. They're financially illiterate, which is very unfortunate. But I think we've got very good market penetration there. Just to kind of start to wrap up a little bit is, some companies have multiple technologies in different stages. So if you have a company that has which is great, if you have a company that has multiple technologies, you're going to want to look at which category each of these technologies is. And hopefully they have a pipeline of technologies in different phases, so they have some up and coming as some are plateauing, and that would indicate longevity for a company. If the company only has one technology and it's plateauing, that company may be at risk. So hopefully this all helps you understand how you can use all this information to make money using the technology adoption life cycle, and understanding that where a company, a stock is in the technology adoption life cycle and where it is in the hype cycle helps you be able to figure out how to profit, how to trade from the technology adoption and from the hype, and not get caught up in the hype and get stuck, at the edge of the chasm and falling in. So please let us know again in the comments below in our Facebook group if you have any questions, comments. What do you think of all this information? What do you think of the technology adoption life cycle? What do you think of our assessment of some of these technologies? What other technologies do you think fall into the various categories? And let's talk about it. And how can we make money using this information, using the technology adoption life cycle and the hype cycle? And we hope you like this. Please smash the like button to help the YouTube algorithm share this information with your fellow BeachBum traders and other fellow traders around the world. Please share this information. And if you're not already subscribed to our BeachBum Trading YouTube channel, we hope that you will choose to do so and hit the notify bell icon so you're notified as we come out with future videos. Again, we hope you find this information helpful. Good luck. Have a great trading day. Thank you again for watching our video. We hope that you liked it. If so, please smash the like button. Give us a thumbs up. If you're not already subscribed, please consider subscribing to our BeachBum Trading YouTube channel. Please share this video with your fellow traders and friends. And please give us your feedback and any recommendations for improvement in the comments section below, and let us know what else we can do to help you in your trading career. Thank you again, good luck, and have a great trading day.